The War of the Worlds. The War of the Worlds. 9. The fighting begins.
So now we're talking, aren't we? The fighting begins in chapter 9. Foreshadowing, of course, what's going to happen in this chapter. These headings here are designed to grab our attention. You've got to bear in mind that this was initially published as part of an ongoing serialised magazine. So it wasn't published in one book, as we have it now, until a bit later. It was published, first of all, as a series of magazines. So each chapter had to be a bit of a cliffhanger, had to have exciting chapter headings that would lead the reader. And so here we have that in this very short telegraphic sentence. The fighting begins. Here we go.
Saturday lives in my memory as a day of suspense. It was a day of lassitude, too, hot and close, with, I am told, a rapidly fluctuating barometer. I had slept but little, though my wife had succeeded in sleeping, and I rose early. I went into my garden before breakfast and stood listening, but toward the common there was nothing stirring but a lark.
So in terms of structure here, we've got a bit more use of perspective. We had Friday night last chapter, now we've got Saturday. We're moving through this in this chronology of time. So we're being taken through in order of events. That gives it a sense of very much realism, like this has actually happened and it's been recounted accurately by the narrator, which essentially is H.G. Wells. So because we've gone from Friday to Saturday, we're going incrementally forward in time. And yet here we're reminded that he's writing this from a future perspective. So Saturday lives in my memory. So we've got that present tense, as in even now, 4 years on, Saturday lives in his memory as a day of suspense. So it's an important day, it's an important moment. It's a red letter day in his memory of these events that happened a few years back. It was a day of lassitude, a day of sort of calm and sort of, you've got to bear in mind this is set in June, so the weather's hot. The day is sunny, hot and close. Hendiadys there with hot and close. Hot and humid, essentially. And with, I am told, a rapidly fluctuated barometer. So again there, he's learnt this after the fact. He's learnt these events about the barometer fluctuating and changing. Now the barometer measures pressure and generally is an indicator of change in the weather. And so if a barometer is fluctuating, that suggests that the weather is about to change too. And that, in a sense, is foreshadowing the events of the Martians too, that even the barometer, even the very atmosphere is changing, which gives that sort of, it's actually a pathetic fallacy where the natural world is changing to represent the events in the story. So you've actually got pathetic fallacy there with the weather being signified by the barometer. It's quite a complex one. A more straightforward one would obviously be a thunderstorm or the weather turning nasty. But a barometer is a very subtle way of saying that the weather was changeable, and therefore that represents the changeable times of the book as well, the novel as well. But it's quite complex. But it was June, so it would be very humid. It would be normal for the barometer to be changing anyway, because thunderstorms tend to happen when we get lots of humidity. And then he goes into his garden, listens, and does his normal things, has his breakfast. He goes into the garden before breakfast, stands listening, and nothing stirring but a lark, a bird. So it's very natural, it's very calm, but we know from the chapter heading that things won't remain calm for very long. So there's that constant underlying tension, which is a structural technique, building dramatic tension, rising action. It's getting more, there's just the underlying sense of something is going to happen in this chapter, which of course it does. But the point is that we're not told straight away. We're sort of made to wait. So it withholds that information, withholds that action, which is all part of creating an interesting narrative. These are all structural points that he's making here, or that I'm making about what he's doing.
The milkman came as usual. I heard the rattle of his chariot and went round to the side gate to ask the latest news. He told me that during the night the Martians had been surrounded by troops, and that guns were expected. Then, a familiar, reassuring note. I heard a train running towards Woking.
So here, in spite of the chapter heading, and in spite of the title of the book, the War of the Worlds and the Fighting Begins, we've got a real sense of normality here. We've got the sun is shining, the larks are singing, the milkman comes, the trains are running. You've got all these normal things are happening. And this is back in the time when these things did happen. And of course, he's writing from a point of view of he knows that there was a whole time when this didn't happen. So when things go wrong, this is the calm before the storm. So I think by giving us that sort of sense of security, which we've had before, it's just even more unsettling that these normal things carry on, even though they're on the brink of war, essentially. And so reminding us of these normal things, as he says, the milkman came as usual. And then he was reassured by the train running towards Woking. A familiar reassuring note, the train running. Things must be okay if the trains are running. Things must be okay if the milkman comes. And of course, we know from the chapter heading that this is not going to be the case for long. So it's foreshadowing, really. The title of the chapter is foreshadowing what's going to happen, but it's pulling against the normality of every day. So can you see the tension there between the chapter heading and actually these normal, safe, everyday events? And there's that tension there between the two things. That's a structural technique that Wells is using to create that unsettling feeling in this chapter and in this novel generally.
"They aren't to be killed," said the milkman, "if that can possibly be avoided." I saw my neighbour, gardening, chatted with him for a while, and then strolled in to breakfast. It was a most unexceptional morning. My neighbour was of the opinion that the troops would be able to capture or destroy the Martians during the day. "It's a pity they make themselves so unapproachable," he said. "It would be curious to know how they live on another planet. We might learn a thing or two."
I do enjoy this. The man who reads this audiobook and his characterisation of these everyday people is hilarious. They also have this funny voice. The milkman, we had some direct speech there from the milkman. We've got some direct speech here from the neighbour. What this does is it adds to that realism. These are real people. Well, they're not, they're characters, but they're constructs of real people, even if they have got silly voices. "It's a pity they make themselves so unapproachable. It'd be curious to know how they live on another planet. We might learn a thing or two." Anyway, the point there is that they are quite arrogant, aren't they? They feel, the milkman first of all, "They aren't to be killed," said the milkman, "if that can possibly be avoided." So we've got the sense that we have the choice whether they're killed or not. We're trying to do this in a friendly, calm, civilized way. There's no sense here that actually the Martians are the ones who pose the serious threat. The Martians are the ones who are far superior in terms of their weaponry, but also their intelligence as well. And the same from the neighbour. It's a pity they make themselves so unapproachable. It'd be curious to know how they live on another planet. We could learn something. We could learn from these things. Why do they have to be so silly about it and so aggressive? It's a shame we have to kill them. There's that arrogance there from humanity. It's a running motif throughout the novel. Is this humanity and humanity's arrogance and superiority, really, or feelings of superiority, and how that's really challenged and shown in stark relief when we learn, or they learn, that the Martians are far superior and that they are nothing really but mere ants compared to the Martians, and they can't do anything to stop them.
He came up to the fence and extended a handful of strawberries, for his gardening was as generous as it was enthusiastic. At the same time, he told me of the burning of the pine woods about the Byfleet golf links.
More proper nouns here with the Byfleet golf links. Again, if you look on the map, you can find exactly where that is, and you can see where the second cylinder lands. And if you look on the classroom wall, the huge ordnance survey map there shows exactly, pinpoints where these things are landing. So you can see, and generally speaking, it's all moving towards London. There's everything gets a little bit nearer to London all the time, so there's that incrementum. So the Byfleet golf links are slightly further east, which means it's slightly nearer to London, slightly nearer the capital. Therefore, that's rising action, that's dramatic tension too, and that's a structural choice to actually set these things happening incrementally closer to London, the capital city. And you can see how the whole narrative moves further towards the capital as we go, therefore presenting more and more threat. because while in Horsell Common that's one thing, but if it's in the middle of London, that's something else. And the narrator moves himself and ends up himself being in the middle of London in Primrose Hill and looking down over London. So there's a gradual movement towards the capital as well here. It's a very slow start, but it gets faster and faster, like a heartbeat, getting faster and faster as they go.
They say, he said, that there's another of those blessed things fallen there. Number 2. But one's enough, surely. This lot'll cost the insurance people a pretty penny before everything's settled. He laughed with an air of the greatest good humour as he said this. The woods, he said, were still burning, and pointed out a haze of smoke to me. They will be hot underfoot for days on account of the thick soil of pine needles and turf, he said, and then grew serious over poor Ogilvy.
So you can see here how the neighbour's literally laughing at the sort of ridiculousness of having 2 cylinders. One was enough, surely. Fancy having 2, goodness me. He calls them blessed things. He doesn't see them as a threat. These are just a bit of a nuisance, and that there'll be a nuisance for the insurance companies who'll have to sort out all the finances. It's a very, what's called a myopic view, a short-sighted view. So myopic is M-Y-O-P-I-C. After the word myopia, meaning short-sightedness, he, like lots of people, are very short-sighted about the significance and the consequences of this invasion. They just think it's a bit of a nuisance and a bit of a curiosity that'll be over and done within a few days, and the insurance will have to sort it all out. What they're not seeing is this is a massive attack on humanity, on the global community, and so it's a myopic view of arrogant humanity, and that's the point. That's what this book is really about. And we'll look at that again when we look at Inspector Calls for the modern drama part of the course for literature. And again, like H.G. Wells is mentioned in Inspector Calls, which is another reason why I wanted to do both these texts, because they actually reference each other, or Inspector Calls references H.G. Wells, because H.G. Wells was a socialist. He wants to write about how humanity can be better, as a better society. It can look after itself better and look after each other better than it currently does. And Inspector Calls is even more heavy-handed with that. It's a more obvious attack on society, saying, look, we really don't look after people in our society. We need to care for everybody. We need to look out for each other. And so both of these texts really work hand in hand. You can really see that J.B. Priestley, who wrote an Inspector Calls, carries on this tradition that H.G. Wells starts, and it's no coincidence that he references H.G. Wells in the play of Inspector Calls. But we'll get to that in good time. But just sort of give you a heads up of the bigger picture here of what some writers try to do. Most writers are trying to change the world with their writing. They're not trying to just write a little story that makes people laugh. They're trying to change the way we think about ourselves. And that's what H.G. Wells is doing here as a socialist. He wants us to change the way we view ourselves and how we view society. According to H.G. Wells, we must be less arrogant. We must understand that we are vulnerable and we are fallible. We're not this, great superpower. And of course, what he didn't know and didn't necessarily predict, although he predicted many things, was the fall of the British Empire. So we're now reading this after the fall of the British Empire, and we're now not one of the great global superpowers as we were when this was written. So you can imagine at the time in writing this, the country was more arrogant than it probably is now. We sort of do feel more of a sense of we are just a small country in the global economy. But we've still got the sort of hangover of being once a great empire. But he's writing this at the heart of that, the real peak almost of the British Empire. So that's an interesting contextual point that you'll want to be aware of as well, that you've looked at and researched with the Tasmanians and the Black War and what the empire did. But it's just worth reminding again that this book is really not about Martians or little aliens with tentacles out their mouths or whatever. It's not really about that. It's about the people. It's about humanity. And most sci-fi is about people, actually. It's not really about the aliens or the things. It's about what we do about it, how we react to it.
After breakfast, instead of working, I decided to walk down towards the common. Under the railway bridge, I found a group of soldiers, sappers, I think, men in small round caps, dirty red jackets unbuttoned and showing their blue shirts, dark trousers, and boots coming to the calf. They told me no one was allowed over the canal, and looking along the road towards the bridge, I saw one of the cardigan men standing sentinel there. I talked with these soldiers for a time, I told them of my sight of the Martians on the previous evening. None of them had seen the Martians, and they had but the vaguest ideas of them, so that they plied me with questions. They said that they did not know who had authorized the movements of the troops. Their idea was that a dispute had arisen at the Horse Guards. The ordinary sapper is a great deal better educated than the common soldier. And they discussed the peculiar conditions of the possible fight with some acuteness. I described the heat ray to them, and they began to argue among themselves. "Crawl up under cover and rush 'em, says I," said one. "Get out," said another. "What's cover against this here heat? Sticks to cook ya. What we got to do is go as near as the ground will let us, and then drive a trench." "Blow your trenches. You always want trenches. You ought to have been born a rabbit, Snippy." "Ain't they got any necks then?" said a third, abruptly, a little, contemplative, dark man, smoking a pipe. I repeated my description. "Octopuses," said he. "That's what I calls them. Talk about fishes of men, fighters of fish, it is this time."
So here, depending on which version of the book you've got, if you have the version I have, which is the Penguin Classics, with the introduction by Brian Aldiss, you'll have the footnotes at the back, and you'll see there's a reference here. It's a biblical reference. Fighters of men, fishes of men, with a little number 2 next to it. It's well worth looking at the back of the book in the appendices for what the references are there, because you won't know all of them, and that's the point. That's why they're there, and I might sometimes forget to refer to them, so it's always useful to look at the back and just get some clarity there on what they mean, that they're not to be ignored. And here, it's depending on how well you know your Bible, it's a Bible reference to the book of Matthew and from the New Testament, and it talks about how he will make you fishers of men in the Bible story, and here he's inverted that to make it fighters of fish. So rather than, I mean, this is one of the first of many biblical references, particularly when we find the curate character, who is a clergyman himself. We get lots of biblical references, and there's a reason for that, and it's the fact that it's really in that case how ill-prepared religion is in the face of actual real chaos, but how also it gives people faith. So we'll get to that later when it becomes more apparent, but here it's just the first reference there. And in this case, it's simply a matter of, this sapper, this soldier here, a sapper is someone who tends to do a lot of the heavy, hard digging work and some of the sort of civil engineering work in the army. And so often they would dig trenches and things like that in preparation for, communications trenches often in warfare. Anyway, so he's showing his own biblical knowledge there of playing with words and adapting the language. So rather than fishers of men, it's fighters of fish, because they sound like octopuses. Is that the right plural of octopus? Octopi? I don't know. I think we had this before, didn't we? Octopuses, he calls them, because they've got these tentacles. So anyway, it's a quite a vivid image. Again, the whole point of this, I would say, and I'm guessing, is to avoid having to look at the Martians again. We're just having them described by the narrator to these sappers who haven't seen them. So again, we're getting to talk about the Martians without actually seeing them. We're building up that fear and that suspense without necessarily being exposed to them too much and seeing too much of them. So you can see the technique there. It's withholding the information from us so we don't get overexposed and too familiar with the Martians. It's just talking about them, which builds that suspense as we see them preparing for battle.
"Ain't no murder killing beasts like that," said the first speaker. "Why not shell the darn things, straight off, and finish 'em?" said the little dark man. "You can't tell what they might do." "Where's your shells?" said the first speaker. "There ain't no time. Do it in a rush. That's my tip. And do it at once." So they discussed it. After a while, I left them. I went on to the railway station to get as many morning papers as I could. But I will not weary the reader with a description of that long morning and of the longer afternoon. I did not succeed in getting a glimpse of the common, for even Horsell and Chobham church towers were in the hands of the military authorities. The soldiers I addressed didn't know anything. The officers were mysterious as well as busy. I found people in the town quite secure again in the presence of the military. And I heard for the first time from Marshall, the tobacconist, that his son was among the dead on the common. The soldiers had made the people on the outskirts of Horsell lock up and leave their houses. I got back to lunch about 2, very tired. For, as I have said, the day was extremely hot and dull. And in order to refresh myself, I took a cold bath in the afternoon.
So we've got here these almost non-events, really. We're getting this description of not much happening at all. But we have got the chronology. So now I got back to lunch about 2. So we've been taken through the day step by step in all of its tedious detail. You know, he spoke to some soldiers, nothing much happened. He spoke to Marshall the tobacconist. We learned that his son was among the dead on the common. Then he had a cold bath. You know, this is not really living up to the chapter title of The Fighting Begins. What he's doing there is playing an interesting narrative game. He's holding back. He's keeping his powder dry and withholding the information to then increase that suspense. We know it's coming. We know it's going to happen. We just don't quite know when, and he's making us wait for it, really. So it's doing that narrative technique that you yourselves used when you were doing your narrative writing. Although because you were writing shorter pieces, you didn't have the same scale that he has. He can take his time much longer in a much longer way. But we know by the end of the chapter the fighting has to begin. So we know it's coming.
About 4:30, I went up to the railway station to get an evening paper. But the morning papers had contained only a very inaccurate description of the killing of Stent, Henderson, Ogilvy, and the others. But there was little I didn't know. The Martians did not show an inch of themselves. They seemed busy in their pit, and there was a sound of hammering and an almost continuous streamer of smoke. Apparently, they were busy getting ready for a struggle. Fresh attempts had been made to signal, but without success, was the stereotyped formula of the papers. A sapper told me it was done by a man in a ditch, with a flag on a long pole. The Martians took as much notice of such advances as we should of the lowing of a cow.
So just backing up there a little bit more, we've got the time marker of 4:30. So these time markers of 2 o'clock and 4:30, giving us that sense of time progressing. And then we get something very familiar to Wells and to us that Wells uses, the way in which he describes the way the Martians took as much notice of such advances. This is the deputation, if you remember. This is Ogilvy and Henderson's and Stent's deputation with the white flag. And they took as much notice of that as we should of the lowing of a cow. So again, it's a zoomorphic description. Just a zoomorphic simile, because it's saying as much as we would have as the lowing of a cow. So it's a simile, but it's a zoomorphic simile because it's making us seem like cattle. So to the Martians, we're nothing but mindless cattle. We've been described as bacteria, we've been described as sheep, we've been described as ants, we're now being sort of compared to cows. You can see what Wells is doing there with his zoomorphic descriptions of humanity, making us seem very inferior. So that's a language point there you've got with the simile and the zoomorphism there. But the time markers are structural. And the point of this always is that building of suspense. So if in doubt, if you're not sure what the structural technique is doing, it's probably to build suspense and dramatic tension.
I must confess, the sight of all this armament, all this preparation, greatly excited me. My imagination became belligerent and defeated the invaders in a dozen striking ways. Something of my schoolboy dreams of battle and heroism came back. It hardly seemed a fair fight to me at the time. They seemed very helpless in that pit of theirs.
And notice there the use of perspective. They seemed very helpless in that pit of theirs. So that past tense, looking back, at the time they seemed very helpless. But there's a sense that he knows better now, of course. But at the time they seemed very helpless. So this use of perspective is really important here. They seemed like they were just sitting ducks waiting to be destroyed by the heavy artillery. But actually, we know we're only on chapter 9. We know there's a lot more to go in the book. We know the book's called The War of the Worlds. There must be more to it than that. And he's writing about this 4 years on with that constant reminder that things get a lot worse. So it's building that dramatic tension again, that rising action again.
About 3 o'clock, there began a thud of a gun, at measured intervals from Chertsey and Addleston. I learned that the smouldering pine wood into which the second cylinder had fallen was being shelled, in the hope of destroying that object before it opened. It was only about 5, however, that a field gun reached Chobham for use against the first body of Martians.
So here we've got another time marker. We've got the 3 o'clock, we've got 5 o'clock. Again, always pushing forward with the time. We're getting this real hour-by-hour chronology here of what's happening. So that's a structural technique. And we've also got the proper nouns of Chertsey, Addleston and Chobham, giving that sense of realism as well. The fact that these are real places. And again, if you look to the map, you can see exactly where these things are happening. So we can see the military strategy here is to attack the unopened one first and destroy that one before it opens, ideally, and then to fall back to work on the first cylinder, which obviously has already opened and poses more of a threat.
About 6 in the evening, as I sat at tea with my wife in the summer house talking rigorously about the battle that was lowering upon us, I heard a muffled detonation from the common, and immediately after, a gust of firing. Close on the heels of that came a violent, rattling crash quite close to us that shook the ground. And starting out upon the lawn, I saw the tops of trees about the Oriental College burst into smoky red flame, and the tower of the little church beside it slide down into ruin. The pinnacle of the mosque had vanished, and the roof line of the college itself looked as if a 100-ton gun had been at work upon it. One of our chimneys cracked, as if a shot had hit it, flew, and a piece of it came clattering down the tiles, and made a heap of broken red fragments upon the flower bed by my study window.
So here we are, at long last, the fighting has now begun, and it's come so close to his house that it's actually cracked his chimney stack. And let's just back up a little bit here. We've got the time marker about 6 in the evening, so hour by hour accounts here. And we get the proper nouns, the Oriental College, we get the mosque. Now this, again, if you look on the map and if you zoom in on Google Maps, you'll find, if you look at Maybury and Maybury Hill, you'll see there still is the Oriental College Road. It's still named after this, although the college is long gone. I think it's now a Tesco in its place. But these are real street names. These are real places, and I believe there's still a mosque there, and the mosque that was referred to in this novel. So he's referring to real places, and this is actually where he lived. This is where he's writing it literally about his neighbours. So it's a very, very real narrative, unusually real for a piece of fiction. But he's doing it for that reason, to make it seem so hard-hitting and factual that people would actually believe it. And people did believe it when they first read it. They thought it was a true account of what had happened, and it frightened people, which is exactly what H.G. Wells was going for. That was the effect.
I and my wife stood amazed. Then I realized that the crest of Maybury Hill must be within range of the Martian's heat ray, now that the college was cleared out of the way. At that I gripped my wife's arm, and without ceremony ran her out into the road. Then I fetched out the servant, telling her I would go upstairs myself for the box she was clamoring for. "We can't possibly stay here," I said. And as I spoke, the firing reopened for a moment upon the common. "But where are we to go?" said my wife in terror. I thought, perplexed. Then I remembered her cousins at Leatherhead. "Leatherhead!" I shouted, above the sudden noise. She looked away from me downhill. The people were coming out of their houses, astonished. "How do we get to Leatherhead?" she said. Down the hill I saw a bevy of hussars ride under the railway bridge. 3 galloped through the open gates of the Oriental College. 2 others dismounted and began running from house to house. The sun, shining through the smoke that drove up from the tops of the trees, seemed blood red, and threw an unfamiliar, lurid light upon everything.
Notice here the contrast then between the sunlight and the smoke from the battle, smoke from the Martians. Excuse me. We've seen it before, the smoke rising up against the sunset. And here it's that pathetic fallacy again as well. It's the reminder of the fact that the Martians are spoiling the natural beauty of the Earth, even in its sunlight. And the fact it has a blood red glow, an unfamiliar lurid light upon everything, is sort of symbolic, and it's pathetic fallacy, suggesting that something bad is going to happen. So it's and blood red, of course, is drawn from the semantic field of battle and pain and injury, isn't it? So we've got a few things happening there to do with language, and pathetic fallacy being a language technique as well. So lots to say about that last little bit there.
"Stop here," said I. "You are safe here." And I started off at once for the spotted dog, for I knew the landlord had a horse and dog cart. I ran, for I perceived that in a moment everyone upon this side of the hill would be moving. I found him in his bar, quite unaware of what was going on behind his house. A man stood with his back to me, talking to him. "I must have £1," said the landlord, "and I've no one to drive it." "I'll give you 2, said I, over the stranger's shoulder. "What for?" "And I'll bring it back by midnight," I said. "Lord," said the landlord, "what's the hurry? I'm selling my bit of pig, £2, and you bring it back? What's going on now?"
So the dialogue here between the narrator and the landlord is quite confusing, and it might just be worth clarifying a little bit there. We've got, again, the direct speech of this dialogue, which shows, it gives us that sense of realism. We, as the reader, are immersed into this conversation. We're listening into this conversation, and we can see how desperate the narrator is to hire or rent this horse and cart. So it's literally it's a horse, and the dog cart is a really basic trap, really, that you'd attach to the horse with a harness, and sort of you might be able to get 2 people on it. One of those really simple, old-fashioned chariots that you get pulled behind a horse. You still see them now. Sometimes. So not a grand carriage by any means, just a simple 2-person cart really being pulled behind a horse on 2 wheels. And he's offering twice the asking price. The landlord wants £1, which he seems to think, he says, "I must have £1," which suggests it's quite an expensive rental price. And then the narrator's so desperate for it, he actually offers him £2, which surprises the landlord, because he says, "What for? Lord, what's the hurry? I'm selling my bit of a pig, £2, and you bring it back. What's going on now?" So he can't believe how much he's getting for this, to rent this dog cart. It suggests that he's completely unaware of the dangers only around the corner, but the narrator is well aware that this horse and dog cart will be very much in demand soon. So he pays twice the asking price to make sure he's the one that gets it. And the bit about selling a bit of a pig is quite confusing, because it could, as the glossary says at the back, or the appendices at the back says, that it might mean he's actually selling a pig to the customer, the stranger, and he's having 2 conversations at once. Or it might be the slang for property, that he thinks he's selling for £2, he's selling the property, like, you have it for £2, don't bring it back, kind of thing. So it's a bit unclear. It doesn't matter for us at all, really. What it does show is the fact that how unaware some people still are of the events happening on Horsell Common and the real danger involved. And it shows us the clarity of the narrator's thought that he knows he needs to get out of there very quickly with some transport and get his wife safely to Leatherhead. Now, what this does is gives us some more narrative thrust and sort of action, because to get his wife to Leatherhead, of course, that involves more action taking place. It then provides what's called an impetus, or a reason to then find her again by the end of the novel. So it creates a narrative, a plot device, really. Okay, that's that bit for now.
I explained hastily that I had to leave my home, and so secured the dog cart. At the time, it did not seem to me nearly so urgent that the landlord should leave his. I took care to have the cart there and then, drove it off down the road, and leaving it in charge of my wife and servant, rushed into my house and packed a few valuables, such plate as we had and so forth. The beech trees below the house were burning while I did this, and the palings up the road glowed red. While I was occupied in this way, one of the dismounted hussars came running up. He was going from house to house, warning people to leave. He was going on as I came out of my front door, lugging my treasures, done up in a tablecloth. I shouted after him, "What news?" He turned, stared, bawled something about crawling out in a thing like a dish cover, and ran on to the gate of the house at the crest. A sudden whirl of black smoke driving across the road hid him for a moment. I ran to my neighbour's door and rapped to satisfy myself of what I already knew, that his wife had gone to London with him and had locked up their house. I went in again, according to my promise, to get my servant's box, lugged it out, clapped it beside her on the tail of the dog cart, and then caught the reins and jumped into the driver's seat beside my wife.
So just backing up a little bit there, we've got the red colour of the palings glowing red, as well as the beech trees burning. So you've got this, again, that signal or that symbol of red suggesting danger and suggesting fire as things burn. And then a bit further on, of course, we've got the speech from the hussar, so the mounted soldier on horseback, and he shouts something about crawling out in a thing like a dish cover. Now, that, again, what that does is it tells us what's happening in a quite frightening way. Crawling out. I mean, the word crawling is interesting. What an interesting verb choice that is. You know how I get excited by verbs. This is an exciting verb choice because if it's crawling out, it makes it sound like some sort of monster, doesn't it? Which, of course, in a way they are. So, but we don't have to see it ourselves. By hearing it from somebody else's perspective, what Wells does is he avoids having to describe it too much himself to give us too much familiarity with the Martians, but he lets us know what's going on. So you can see that technique again, sort of receiving that second-hand news, crawling out in a thing like a dish cover. It sounds bizarre, doesn't it? It sounds unsettling. And then a sudden whirl of black smoke. Look at how this gets faster and faster. Lots of dynamic verbs here, so action words. A sudden whirl of black smoke driving across the road. It's that word driving there. I ran to my neighbour's door, rapped, gone to London, lugged it out. This is the box. Clapped it beside her on the tail of the dog cart, caught the reins, jumped up into the driver's seat. You know, all these action verbs here, these dynamic verbs, are all suggesting very fast-paced action in the story, which of course he is. He's trying to get him and his wife and servant out safely into the dog cart and get to Leatherhead.
In another moment we were clear of the smoke and noise, and spanking down the opposite slope of Maybury Hill, towards Old Woking.
Oh, this has got to be the best verb in the whole book, hasn't it? Spanking down the opposite slope of Maybury Hill towards Old Woking. What a great verb that is. Spanking down the opposite slope. So this is fast. They're going as fast as they can. And that's it. So again, you can look on the map and see exactly the route they take. Down Maybury Hill, which is obviously a hill anyway, so they pick up speed, and down towards Old Woking to get to the sort of south. Well, it's actually the south east of where they are to get to Leatherhead, which is south of London.
In front was a quiet, sunny landscape, a wheat field ahead on either side of the road, and the Maybury Inn with its swinging sign. I saw the doctor's cart ahead of me. At the bottom of the hill, I turned my head to look at the hillside I was leaving. Thick streamers of black smoke, shot with threads of red fire, were driving up into the still air and throwing dark shadows upon the green treetops eastward. The smoke already extended far away to the east and west, to the Byfleet pine woods eastward, and to Woking on the west. The road was dotted with people running towards us, and very faint now, very distinct, through the hot, quiet air, one heard the whir of a machine gun that was presently stilled, and an intermittent cracking of rifles. Apparently the Martians were setting fire to everything within range of their heat ray. I am not an expert driver, and I had immediately to turn my attention to the horse. When I looked back again, the second hill had hidden the black smoke. I slashed the horse with the whip, and gave him a loose rein until Woking and Send lay between us and that quivering tumult. I overtook and passed the doctor between Woking and send.
So there we are. More dynamic verbs. If we just look at the last bit there, slash the horse with the whip. This is quite violent verbs being used here to show the desperation and the urgency with which he wants to get away. We've got more proper nouns here. The Byfleet, Pinewoods, Woking, Send we've got here as well. These are all places. The Maybury Inn, the pub itself with its swinging sign. So you can see here he's really charting the journey so that readers can and would have known this journey, this route, because, as I say, the area of Surrey where they are near Woking is one that was quite familiar to wealthy Londoners or wealthy people who worked in London. And it's well worth having a look on the map so you can see the exact journey yourselves, because he's very specific about where things are to the east, where things are to the west. Now, the noise of the machine gun here, the hot, quiet air, the whir of the machine gun, about halfway down that page 43. We've got, halfway down the extract, I should say, or 2/3 of the way down the page of writing, I mean, on page 43, if you've got my version of the book. We've got the sound of machine guns, obviously, again, is another signifier of battle. We don't need to see the battle to know it's happening, and by hearing the gunshots, it tells us what's going on without giving us too much information. As I've said before, time and time again, the more information he gives us, the less mystery there is. So by just telling us there's gunshots and machine gun fire, that builds more suspense. We're not sure who's winning, who's losing. It builds that suspense and that dramatic tension, as always. And then we've got the fire and the Martians setting fire to everything within the range of their heat ray. So again, more destruction, more burning, and we're left uncertain as to whether the army have been successful against them or not. And that's it for chapter 9. I'll see you again back for chapter 10 in the storm. Can you believe it? Bye for now.